Good morning. I'm glad you all could join us today. Familiar faces. I know we did this back in November, but we're looking to revisit the conversation and touch on some topics that we didn't get to last time. I'm joined this morning by Mr. Rashid, Mr. Pringle, Mr. Williams, and I am Mr. Hugo. So we think we're just going to get right into it so we can make the most of our time. I'm just going to throw this question out to the group. Anyone feel free to answer. How many teachers have you had in your experience that have looked like you? Either male.
I can start with that. In grade school, our principal was a woman, Miss Booker, and it didn't. When I was younger, it didn't really have that much of an impact on me. She was a black woman, strong black woman. Now, in retrospect, I was raised by my mother primarily, and it was just normal for me to see someone like Miss Booker running the school because that's what I was used to being at home. But now that I think back, this is the '80s in Waterbury, Connecticut, which isn't a beacon of light, so to speak. But she was tough, She was quick to check people. She knew all the kids, especially the kids of color, and she had that sort of lasting impact. There were times where you would run into Miss Booker at the Pathmark, and she didn't turn off the game, she was Annie Booker to other people in the store, but when we saw her, it was Miss Booker, and she always gave that look and made sure that you were doing what you were supposed to do, and then had kind words to say to mom and all that. But she was a prominent force at Driggs School, and again, it didn't really hit me what that meant when I was in K through 5, but thinking back on that now, it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing for her to accomplish that.
Mr. Pringle?
I would add by saying that my grade school, I didn't have any black teachers, but there were assistants to the teachers, and there were 2 black ladies that reminded me of my older aunts, and one was a little older. She passed away, but she was not to be played with at any moment, and I always had to fall in line with these ladies because they would always hold you accountable, take your hat off, make sure you stop talking when the teacher's talking, all that type of stuff. And for me, that was just monumental to see that because it was somebody that looked like me, and it made me feel at home, even though they yelled at me a lot. But it was definitely refreshing, and I loved it. At the time, I didn't love it, but now when I look back at it, it was awesome because you felt like somebody was in your corner.
For me, I've had a lot of, if not teachers, I've had a lot of prominent educators. So, elementary school, I had Mr. Marble, who was the principal, black, really kind, forceful. He said what he meant, what he wanted to do, and you sort of did that. I had Miss Say in first grade, Miss Franklin in second and third grade. I did not repeat. It was a switch class where they had both, just letting you know. Mm-hmm. And then in middle school, the most prominent person was actually Mr. Inman, who was the principal there. And he was sort of in that Joe Clark model. He was no nonsense, but he was fun. I had Mr. Dupree in 7th grade. He was my math teacher. So I actually had a lot of folks. There was Mr. Gordon, who was an art teacher at my middle school. But then later on in my high school, he actually transferred to Choate. So I got to know him. I had Mr. Bradford, who was another art teacher, who was he took a very active role in being a black role model. When I was at Choate, I had Miss Bell, who was a English teacher when I was a 3rd former at Choate, who is now a college counselor, so she's a bit of a colleague. So again, there were enough people throughout, though not many were direct teachers, other than Mr. Dupree in 7th grade and then a few of the art classes. So again, it was great to sort of have that model, but really it was Mr. Inman in middle school, that had the biggest impact because it was all about holding yourself accountable, and again, I think I try to sort of emulate some of that, where you are really forceful, especially with those kids that look like you. You hold them to their own higher standard. He makes you have a higher standard, which I thought was really important. You
I think it's important. My experience has been different. I've had very few teachers that look like me. I do remember Mrs. Burke when I was in, I believe it was the fourth grade. And then the principal of the elementary school, she was an African American woman, doctor. Her name is escaping me right now. And then when I got to high school, I did 1 year at Bloomfield High. Dr. Howard, I believe was his name. He was the principal at the time. And I take that back. There were black teachers around and coaches and so forth. But leaving Bloomfield High and going to Avon Old Farms and having no black adults in my academic world was different. So to then come back and be a black teacher myself, I guess I had to not necessarily call on the influences I had in terms of the teachers I had, but just the mentors I had in a whole different realm. They weren't people of color, but they still helped to guide and direct and lead and teach me, which is an interesting segue. I'd like to touch on that. Like, think about the mentors that you've had, in terms of that have helped you professionally, that have helped you, I guess, just get to the point that you are now. How many of those people were people of color? Did it matter whether or not they were people of color? For me, like I said, I talked briefly. I'll talk a little bit more after you guys answer. But let's look at that. What were your mentors? Who were they? Who are they?
I had three very prominent males in my life growing up. My high school theater director, who was also my theater teacher in middle school. He worked on the middle school shows and the high school shows. He got me to do what I'm doing now, in the theater. Great guy. He was another one of those no-nonsense teachers. It's funny that many of my mentors, I had a very combative start with them. But then we grew close. Kevin Collins was definitely somebody I was very combative with in middle school. But by the time I got to 7th grade, 8th grade, we saw eye to eye, and he really opened up the world of theater to me. While I was in high school, he was white. While I was in high school, my high school art and Spanish teacher, again, I couldn't stand him, and I don't think he cared so much for me either. There was a moment I called him a few colorful words and had to spend 3 days at home. But when I got back to school after that, it was really big of him. Because he was kind of the type that, I guess you could do that back in the 90s. He was the type that held grudges, but...
do that now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you might get yourself in trouble if you try and do that stuff now with a student. But he sort of opened the door and said, he was a white teacher as well, and just said, look, I mean, we've got two different ways we can go with this. We can try and understand each other, or we can just keep fighting every day. And we work toward trying to understand each other. And Mr. Vassallo, to this day, is a person that I could still call and lean on if I needed him. He was with me all throughout high school, all throughout my college career. We kind of lost touch a little bit here and there when I was in grad school. But from time to time, we're still on the phone talking to each other. And then the third was an African American man, John Carter, who was the choreographer for our shows. He was very, very tough on all of us. And having seen him perform, it made it easier for me to accept how hard he was on some of us, especially some of us that were thinking about pursuing. Because he almost made it himself, and whenever any of us were like, yeah, this is something I want to do, he pushed us a little extra and made us really focus and work really hard. And he really is the catalyst to my work ethic in the theater, just being tenacious, always, making sure that I'm putting my best foot forward, especially on those days when you want to feel lazy and don't feel like doing it. He would get in our faces, he would yell and make sure that we're doing what we do. But outside of rehearsal, he was just a very good friend, John taught me how to drive, you know, all of this stuff, you know, and it was just nice to have, he was like a big brother to me, you know, outside of rehearsal. You know, we go to the movies sometimes, things like that. He was always taking care, which was something that was very, very helpful and what I needed at that time.
Mr. Bringle?
I would say my main mentor growing up was a guy named Eric Pashkovsky. He's a white guy from Beacon Falls, Connecticut, but he spent a lot of his time in New Haven, and he coached AAU teams. And around 8th grade, I was looking for a new team because I was playing for like a local team in my neighborhood, and he picked me up on his team. It was called Farnham House down in Farnham. That's like a legendary place down in New Haven to play basketball when you're growing up. And this guy just has so much respect from so many people in the city, which were more, you know, people of color. Some of the best basketball players played for him, and he took me under his wing. Like, I would go to his house, we would go out to eat. He would come to games, he would support me, because my dad wasn't around for a big part of my life, so that was a big void for me. But he was I don't know how to say this, but he was like a different type of white person. I know that sounds kind of weird, but he was really down to earth, but he was well respected, but he respected me more importantly. And he understood what it meant to be from New Haven and the struggles that you have to go through, and he seen something in me. He actually tried to help me get into Hamden Hall at one point, and you know, I wasn't feeling it, but I was almost not here at Westminster because of that. But I had to veto that call myself, and I'm here now. But more importantly, he was awesome. And then secondly, just growing up in the neighborhood I came from, it was just looking up to people that played sports in the city. You know, I didn't have too many role models that was telling me what to do. I just competed as hard as I could, and I looked up to the people that kind of went further in life and played in college or were some of the best basketball players coming up, or football players. So for me, it was just through competition, and that's how I kind of made some bonds, and I learned a lot. I learned that nobody really cares how you feel. You just got to compete at all times, and that kind of carried out through life for me. So, you know, that was huge. That was huge.
I mean, I guess mine are sort of in different stages. You know, I grew up, you know, I'm the youngest of 7 kids. I have 3 older brothers, and I looked up to my older brothers, you know, so that was always useful. Looked up to my father, you know, was a mechanic, worked with his hands, you know, but was always there. You know, I had the folks that I mentioned before, some of the principals at my school, but professionally, you know, when I decided to go into college admission, you know, the first person who really helped me out was my college roommate, Denniston Reed. You know, he's a trustee now at Colgate, but he worked in admission, and I was thinking, I don't know if I want to come back to sort of work at Colgate, you know, and, you know, spoke to him. He was there at the time, and just sort of throughout, periodically, have sort of really good conversation. You know, he's also Jamaican. His family coming from Jamaica, worked, you know, went to Colgate, knew that experience, works in education, and just was always, even though he's a year older than me, was always that person that said, yeah, that's the type of person you want to aspire to. So that was actually really, I was very fortunate to sort of have him and still have him as a mentor. The other person is actually a woman, Joan Mudge, who, she's the one who talked me into sort of, you know, making the jump from doing college admission to doing college counseling. She was at an all-girls school, white woman, all-girls school, older woman. Had a great conversation with her. You know, went there, had a chance to work with her for a year. And throughout my sort of career professionally, just always a great person to sort of have, who sort of really understood the profession, but also understood people. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's sort of one of the really important things. And I think for all of us, those people who know people, mm-hmm. you know, who know how to get to the best of who you are. You know, they don't worry about the other stuff, and really have the opportunity to just engage, which I think has been key. So I feel like I've always been pretty fortunate in terms of having many different folks around to help support me and point me in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I'm similar to you in a lot of different levels and areas of my life and times, I guess. One of my first mentors was a gentleman by the name of Chris Brown, who's no longer with us. He was my sister's boyfriend. And I met him when I was 10 years old. and he taught me how to be cool. So the guy that you see before you is a credit to Chris Brown.
You've
Thank you.
seen pictures. That's all I'm saying.
No, I mean that was before, but I mean all this is because of him. You know, he taught me the things that I didn't know. I mean, I went to a Catholic school. I didn't know how to interact with black kids, and I grew up in a suburb, and we were the only black family. So he kind of he's talked to my sister like, "What's up with your little brother? We gotta work on it." Which was, but he, put first speakers in the back of my truck and just anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But so that he was a big influence, and when he passed, that was traumatic. Dad was always a big influence. I think parents obviously super important. That foresight, to see things that I couldn't see. But early in my education, there's three people that come to mind. A gentleman by the name of Bill Crine. He was the dean of faculty at Avon Old Farms when I was a young teacher, and I swore this man hated me. Like I swore he hated me.
That's understandable.
Like he would just any chance he had, he would just I'm gonna tear him down. But I didn't understand at the time because I was so young and so inexperienced that he was actually helping me. And he's one of the people I look at now. I'm like, wow, he did a lot for me. Ken LaRock, who was the head of school at Avon Old Farms, who convinced me to be a teacher because I was going to be a police officer. I was going to be chasing bad guys down, doing my thing, and he said, you should think about education. I'm like, no. Why would I do that? That looks so boring. And you got to deal with kids. I'm going to chase bad guys. I'm going to drive fast. And I told my mom, I'm like, this is an opportunity for me to become a police officer. A teacher. And I said, but I'm not doing that. That's why I'm lifting all these weights and running and be a cop. She's like, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. You should probably see what this man has to say. And because of him, I became a teacher, and he helped me, grow and become a better person. And then there was my football coach. I'll never forget, two football coaches, Kevin Driscoll and also Dave Fasano. Kevin Driscoll was the head coach. He helped me become a better player. But our offensive line coach, I wasn't no lineman, but Dave Fasano, he was an English teacher. And I look at this guy and I think back, he was a brilliant man, fierce football player. Apparently they tell stories about when he was in college, he used to have to get dressed in another locker room because he was too intense to be around his teammates. That's who I want. That's what I want. But I remember we'd be in practice and we'd be hitting the sled, and he would quote Shakespeare while we're hitting the sled. Dudes are falling out and heat stroke and all kind of stuff, and he's quoting Shakespeare. And off the field, he was just that warrior scholar. He took off the whistle and he got into the classroom and he was a different guy. And I'm like, I like that. I want to be that in some capacity. So that was cool for me. Let's move on. So actually, let's stay on this idea of mentors. We've talked about the people who have mentored us and have been big important in our lives. Now that we are in this position, the four of us, let's be real, we're all mentors in some regard. What's your responsibility? How do you see yourself as a mentor, and what is your responsibility for colleagues, students, your own children? How do you mentor?
That's a really good question, because the reality is, I think that, like anything else, there's a bit of an evolution, and I think, as I was saying before, I think we all can sort of point to people who are always tough, and sort of held you to account. And I feel like for me, I'm sort of trying to get to that point where not all styles work for all people, and the reality is, and you can't help but look back and sort of think about what did you do wrong. And you can't help but say, are there those people who I could have mentored better because instead of using my style for them, I didn't figure out their style and cater it to them. Because I do feel like I'm harder on black boys in general, and I think we all sort of have that. It's like, listen, you have to be still, you have to be ready for the world, you have to be prepared. And sometimes that doesn't work, and sometimes it backfires. So I feel like I'm sort of in the process right now of trying to cater who I am and how I am in a way that best suits the people I'm working with. So as an advisor, you know that all of your kids are different. All of them are different, and you know you've approached it. And listen, I want to be equitable in terms of how I treat people, but the reality is that's not how you're equitable, and we have to learn how to sort of approach people in the right way. And the same thing with coaching. There are some kids you ride because you know you get them better. There are other kids you ride and they break, and that doesn't help them and it doesn't help the team. So I do feel like, you know, for me, I'm still in this process of how do I work with people to be their best. In particular, black boys, and I think even more importantly now, black girls, who have even fewer models that they are seeing. So again, it's one of those things where I feel like I'm learning how to be better, to give more that's better for them.
That's good. That's good.
I would say just being here in this role at Westminster, you have to wear so many different hats. So you're working with so many different types of people, and I'm really hard on the black boys, but I'm pretty hard on everybody. Like I'll hold
That's true.
as much as you know. I still owe Chris Robinson a spanking, but he was a great person for what he did for this school. But I held him to a highest level, so it hurt me for what he did. But we all learn from that. But then there's people like the Khalil Walkers and the other kids that are different, but you just got to communicate with them in a different way. Like Greg said, you got to meet them where they need to be met and not just use one style for everybody. And for me, that's the beauty and the struggle of this whole thing. It's just, but you got to know the kid. You got to spend time. It's like studying, like, you know, and coaching helps me with that, but also seeing kids in the dorm, seeing them on campus. Like, I stop and talk to kids. That's just me. Like, you know, I know some people just beeline it. They just keep going to where they have to go. And for me, if I can make that good impression on the kid or make them smile, make them laugh, that's what's amazing to me. So it's just being able to be yourself too, and not try to be someone else, because we all have different styles. I can't be Greg. Well, I don't want to be Greg, but you know, he's a great friend of mine. But like, we all have different styles, and I see how Amin works with his folks in the theater, how Lee does in the dean's office. So it's all different, but it's all the same. It's just all good, hard work, and we just try to hold kids accountable, especially the kids of color, because it's things are limited, but they're also unlimited at the same time, depending on what path you choose. So, yeah, I think that stuff is great.
Selena Watson said something to me that really resonated. She texted me one day and just said, "Thank you for always being so consistent." And for me, that's a very important thing, and I think that's something that all of the kids that we mentor need. You know, that ability to be hard when we have to be hard, but to be nurturing more so than ever, you know, because that's what a lot of these kids growing up on this campus, in this environment, they need that, you know what I'm saying? And just keeping the message consistent. No matter if you're talking to Selena, no matter if you're talking to Dylan, no matter if you're talking to Jackson, you know what I'm saying? The message is consistent. It may come out differently, you know, with the student that you're talking to, but the message is always consistent. And the older my sons are getting, the greater, like, I'm seeing that need for the students that we serve, you know, and that responsibility is huge, you know. I'm much more, with each year that we put on working here, much more cognizant of that, you know. And you wanna do it right, but there is no necessarily right, like, formula to do that, you know. You know, just staying open, listening as much as you can, you know, and just adapting how you need to adapt. You know, I just try and make sure that's what I'm doing for the kids that I serve, and especially for you know, my two boys, you know. But that consistency is key.
I guess it's been a lot to what you guys are speaking. For me, it's been just a constant evolution. You know, I started my career when I was 22, 23. I'm not gonna give away how old I am, but I was 22.
Oh, sorry.
Be careful. All right. 22, 23, and you know, being a young, extremely young faculty member, you know, a year out of college and working with kids and being told, okay, now you have to mentor these kids, you have to work with these kids, and you have to figure out a way to help them. And I'm like, who's going to help me? You know, I took on the role of kind of the big brother early on in my career. You know, we could talk, and I would have kids in my apartment, we would hang out, we'd go out to eat and all that. And that was cool. And that was cool. And I did that for a number of years. But then as I started to evolve as a professional and, you know, I had my own kids, that had to change. You know, I had to move from the big brother to more of kind of the uncle. You know, the uncle that you could talk to, but is going to tell you the truth. You know, and now in year 24, I think it is. Wow.
You know, you gave away your age.
I know, right?
Right.
In year 24, now I'm looking at, you know, kind of the more of the father figure. You know, it's the idea that you can still come talk to me, but understand you're going to get honesty. I may not like everything you're going to say. I will listen, but I'm going to tell you the truth. I tell my daughter this all the time. I sat her down at the dinner table, and I said, listen, you're almost 13, you're getting to this point, you know. I tell all my kids, my son, the youngest, but especially I was telling her because she's close to that age. And I said, you have to be in a position where you can tell your father anything. I said, understand, I will never promise to you that I will not get upset. You know who I am, and I got that other level that I try to keep under wraps. Meditation is a good thing. Thank you, Mr. Doucette. But you know, you have to be able to tell me, and I have to be able to listen and respond and give you the best advice to help you move forward. And I think that's where, you know, working with kids in general, that's the way that I try to approach things. When I'm talking to my forum, they'll tell you I'm very blunt. Usually it's better if there's not another faculty member in the room because, you know, I'm very direct in the way that I talk to them. But that's the same way I talk to my advisees. That's the same way I talk to my own children. That's the same way I used to talk to my football players. You know, this is how it goes. I didn't realize that you can't break them all because that didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. That
you
was
gotta
early
learn
in my
that.
career.
You gotta learn that.
That was my
Doesn't
goal.
work sometimes.
Absolutely.
I remember first, you know, just a sidebar. I remember being a young coach and like my goal in the first 2 days of practice is how many kids can I make throw up. That was like. That was the goal, you know. But I was young. I've evolved.
Well, when I was coaching, we could suit up with them. And
I heard the stories.
And my job was to try to run them over. I know what Will told you.
Will told
I know
me.
what Will told you. I ran one. So, you know, you could do that back in the day.
I would love to see Greg dressed up.
I see it, right?
I went to the line, did back, and did it all. Did it all.
Love to see Greg coming through the hole.
Nah, man.
Good night.
Yeah.
Anyway,
See you in the chapter.
so I'm not sure how much time we have. One more. I don't think it would be right if I didn't throw this out there.
January 6th, yep.
And I have to throw out January 6th. Okay. And the thing that I saw on January 6th, and you all can chime in, the thing that I saw is that we've had all these movements and Black Lives Matter and what have you. And the thing that I saw personally, and I don't speak for anyone else, is that yes, Black Lives Matter, but I saw on that day that they didn't matter as much as white lives. And it hurt. And it took me a long time to recover, and a lot of conversations and a lot of soul searching to even get back to zero. I'm interested to know, I know we don't have a lot of time, but how did it land on you all? Mr. Rashid?
Same, I would say. There was, in the light of the tragic events this summer, I felt like there was momentum and movement for things to start getting better, you know, and to witness that and see that and know that how many people were just involved with like allowing that to happen. You know, it was hurtful and painful, you know, and you know, it was just like, man, I had a tough time trying to figure out how to more or less talk to my eldest son. My youngest, he just does not get all of that yet, you know. But you know, the conversations that I was able to have in light of, you know, all the stuff that was going on in the summer with my eldest, you know, I feel like I'm years behind now, you know, with what happened on January 6th in terms of trying to explain to him the way it could be out there, you know. So it was disheartening, really, really disheartening.
Mr. Purgle?
I was just incredibly sad. You know, to piggyback what I mean said, just about the momentum. We were all on the coalition as well, just trying to push some things here at Westminster, some agendas, and to see that, it was just really disturbing to see how far apart things still are. And I even had friends that were like, not upset about it, and it made me question my friendship, just because when there was just a few other black people out there, I think it was like 4 black people that were at the Capitol. They had the National Guard there, and this whole riot, there was nobody there. Like I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This country it needs healing, and I'm not sure how you do it. I'm glad to be at a place like Westminster where I'm amongst my brothers and we're able to help people, and it's real, it's genuine. Parents really appreciate it, the kids appreciate it. But seeing that was just sad. I just remember texting my basketball team just saying, hey, I hope everybody's doing okay. If you need to talk, I don't have the answers, but I'm here for you guys because this is terrible, and we're a family. And I hope we all look at each other the same, and no one is looking at this and thinking this is an example of how you should act, because this is embarrassing. So for me, it was just, and even talking to my daughter about it, she doesn't really understand. She just turned 4. And she's like, what kind of party is that, Dad? I was just like, this is a party actually where black people are never going to be invited to, and we don't want to be invited to it. So she was like, okay, and then she just runs with her guys. So again, it was definitely troubling. But
For me, it was surreal, it was amazing, it was disappointing and unsurprising. I think that was sort of, the reality is, you said it was white lives matter. Really, it was sort of a white lie that matters more. That was really sort of the key. And again, I think this is a larger societal issue. Where are we in terms of our healing? Because the reality is, this is a healing that should have started in 1863 that we haven't really gotten to. This is all sort of a continuation. That history is not a matter of moments that are disconnected. This is a continuation. We haven't had, like Brian Stevenson always talks about, truth and reconciliation. We are not, as a nation, willing to have a conversation about reconciliation. So there can be no healing. We are talking about folks who are feeling that they lost power when they never really had power. And it's this idea of, what is that identity that you hold on to? And again, I think these are the larger conversations that we need to have. So last Saturday when I was talking to my advisees, and the question I was putting to them, what can we do so you become comfortable being uncomfortable? How can you have a conversation that you feel comfortable not having the right answer? How do you feel comfortable saying something that other people are going to disagree with you? How can you accept information that shakes the world that you believe in? And I think that's where we have to get to. So if anything, I'm hoping that this is that moment of the conversation. I hope that 2020 and 2021 is that moment in our American history where we start moving forward. That the evolution, the American evolution, because the revolution doesn't happen. These are long-term ideas that we have. So again, part of me is unsurprised, and I'm hoping that we can use this as a moment to have real conversation. And not judgment, but real conversation. Because people are going to say the wrong thing. People are going to disagree. People are going to think I'm wrong. And that's fine. I want them to tell me why they think they're wrong. And I'm not going to judge them, but I'm going to tell you why I have the answer.
I was, just a last thought, I felt bad. I said what I said earlier, but I really felt bad for my son Jalen, because me and his mom, we tell him all the time, things are, you can do whatever you want, things are getting better in this world, it's yours for the taking. And he has this optimistic view of the world and the way that things should work, and then you see something like that, and it sets him back. And I can see, the conversations that we've had, that it set him back. And the idea, the role of a parent now is to get him back on track and to understand that, yes, we can achieve and move forward. Don't let these events slow you down. But that's what we do as parents.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, I thank you again. As I said, this is what we do, whether it's in the backyard or on the fire pit or on the deck or, at chapel. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Westminster, thank you.
likewise,
Yes,
thank you, everybody.